They didn't want me, but life did. That's the first thought I remember truly owning, not the ones they fed me when I was a child. Not the words carved into me by years of cold stares, missed birthdays, or the empty seats saved for no one. Just that one moment of awakening. They didn't want me, but life did. I'm Rachel, and this isn't a sob story. It's a survival story. I was born on a Tuesday. My mother never talked about the weather that day, or how my tiny fingers curled around hers in the hospital room. She never told me if I cried too much, or if I came into the world quietly like a shadow. All I ever got were the reminders, subtle and sharp, that I was the mistake. An accident. A glitch in her timeline. A decision she had no courage to undo. I didn't learn those words from her lips. I learned them from everything else. The way she flinched when I hugged her too tightly, the silence in the photos where I was always standing just a little too far from the center. The missing letters in the birthday cards she never sent. They say some mothers sing lullabies. Mine gave me silence. My father wasn't cruel. He just wasn't there. His presence in my life was like a blurry photograph, always suggested, never clear. He sent checks. He didn't send love. So, I grew up unwanted. But I still grew. It's funny how children don't need to be told directly that they're not loved. They feel it. They breathe it. They wear it like second skin. At 7, I started asking fewer questions. At 10, I stopped asking anything at all. They say the human heart is resilient. Mine became a fortress. No windows, no doors. Just a girl who learned early that smiles could be masks and family didn't always mean safety. I became good at reading rooms. I could tell when someone's eyes didn't light up at my presence. I could sense when people tolerated me instead of embracing me. And then one day I heard it. Not through whispers, not behind closed doors. I heard my aunt, her voice slicing through the walls of the house like broken glass. Rachel was never supposed to be here. She was the accident that ruined her mother's life. That was the moment I stopped pretending. I didn't cry that night. I didn't break any furniture or scream into a pillow. I walked to the mirror. I stared at the girl looking back at me. Big eyes. Silent lips. Fragile shoulders. But beneath all that, fire. A small, trembling flame. And I said to her, "One day, you'll prove them wrong." The years that followed weren't kind. But they were mine. At school, I didn't shine. Not because I couldn't, but because no one ever told me I could. I was the quiet one in the back. The one teachers often forgot to call on. The one with secondhand clothes and homemade lunches wrapped in silence. But in books, I found freedom. In stories, I found voices that sounded like mine. In pages, I found worlds where unwanted girls became queens. I began to write. At first, it was nonsense. Scribbles and fantasy, and words only I understood. But every sentence I wrote whispered a little louder. You are not what they say you are. I remember the first story I finished. It was about a girl named Ivy who was cast out of her village because she had strange powers. They said she was cursed, unwanted, dangerous. But Ivy didn't shrink. She didn't beg. She built a garden outside the village. And over time, people began to wander into her world. Drawn by color, by beauty, by magic. By the end of the story, the same people who had exiled her came back, asking for healing. I closed the notebook and cried. I wasn't crying for Ivy. I was crying for me. I began journaling daily. Not just the hurt, but the hope. The dreams I didn't dare speak aloud. The versions of me that weren't silent, weren't dismissed, weren't invisible. I dreamed of speaking on stages. Of having a name that meant something. Of returning home not to prove my worth, but to show them I never needed their validation to begin with. But healing isn't linear. Some days I hated them so much it made me shake. Other days I just wanted a birthday call. Just one. The betrayal wasn't always in what they said, it was in what they didn't. No, I'm proud of you. No, you're doing great. No, you matter. Silence can be violent. Especially when it's from the people who were supposed to love you first. But life noticed me. I found a teacher who read one of my stories and said, Rachel, this is real talent. I found a friend who looked me in the eyes and said, "You're not hard to love." I found strength in the quiet places. I started posting my stories online. Nothing big, just a blog. Within months, strangers were reading my words,
commenting, crying,
thanking me. For the first time, I felt seen. Not tolerated. Not overlooked.
seen.
But here's the twist you didn't see coming. The same people who once discarded me, the same family who labeled me as the unwanted one, they would come back. Years later, when the world started to know my name, not because they missed me, not because they changed, but because they finally realized who I had become. And in that moment, I had a choice to make. Would I welcome them? Would I forgive them? Would I give them a seat at the table they once refused me? Or would I walk away, knowing that I didn't need to prove anything anymore? Before I tell you what I chose, let me take you back. Back to where it all started. To the girl who was never hugged too tightly. To the moments that almost broke her. To the nights she held herself because no one else would. This isn't just a story of pain. It's a story of rising from it. Because sometimes the unwanted become unforgettable. And sometimes, the people who bet against you live long enough to watch you bloom. You'd think I was born into chaos. But the truth is, my family looked perfect on the outside. A suburban house in Colorado Springs. A mom who taught Sunday school. A stepfather who worked as a software technician. And two older siblings who always seemed like the golden children, Paige and Caleb. We looked like the American dream. But even dreams can become nightmares when you're the part that doesn't fit. My mother, Susan, had me when she was 19. Just after graduating high school, and just before she met the man she would marry. The man who wasn't my father. I was the leftover piece from a past she wanted to erase. She never said it out loud, but she didn't have to. Everything in the way she treated me was laced with regret. I wasn't her first daughter. I was the daughter of her mistake. Her husband, my stepfather, Richard, was polite, present, and completely uninterested in me. He was more of a landlord than a parent. He never yelled. He never hit me. He just never saw me. At birthdays, he'd give Paige and Caleb elaborate presents, bikes, concert tickets, branded shoes. I once got a gift card to a store that no longer existed. And when I tried to speak up, the answer was always the same. We're doing our best, Rachel. Be grateful. Gratitude.
That word haunted me.
Be grateful you're here. Be grateful we let you stay. Be grateful we didn't give you up when we had the chance. Paige was 5 years older than me. She was the definition of picture perfect. Cheer captain. Honor roll. Prom queen. Everything I wasn't. She never said she hated me, but her silence screamed it. She'd leave me out of sleepovers. Lock her bedroom door. Roll her eyes when I asked to sit with her and her friends. Why do you always follow me around like a lost puppy? She once spat. Caleb, on the other hand, ignored me completely. He was too busy with sports and video games. But at least he wasn't cruel. Just absent. When I was 9, I remember coming home from school, excited about a poem I had written for class. It had won second place in a local contest. My teacher had written in red ink, "You have a voice, Rachel. Never stop using it." I ran inside with the certificate in hand, breathless and glowing. Paige looked at it and muttered, "Cute." My mother didn't even lift her eyes from the laundry basket. "You know we don't hang second-place ribbons in this house." I folded the paper and tucked it in my sock drawer that night. It stayed there for years. You learn quickly that validation won't come from people who never wanted you in the first place.
So I stopped chasing it.
And started collecting my wins in silence. Middle school was worse. I didn't fit in. I was too quiet, too awkward, too invisible. Other girls had new backpacks and phone cases that matched their friends. I had one friend, Haley, a girl who smelled like peanut butter and laughed like she'd swallowed the sun. Haley saw me when no one else did. But even she moved away by 8th grade. At home, I became the ghost girl. The one who cleaned her own dishes, made her own lunch, and did her own laundry. There was never any food labeled with my name. I got what was left. Always. On Thanksgiving, they had a tradition. Everyone said what they were thankful for. I was 12 when I finally spoke up. I'm thankful I still live here. The room went silent. Richard coughed. My mother frowned. Later that night, she pulled me aside. Don't say things like that in front of your siblings. I wanted to ask why not. Was it embarrassing that I told the truth? But I didn't ask. I just nodded and went back to being invisible. By the time I hit high school, I knew better than to expect affection. I made peace with my solitude. I even embraced it. My escape? Writing. I wrote during lunch breaks, during the late hours of the night when everyone was asleep, and in the back of class when the teacher wasn't paying attention. Stories poured out of me, not because I was inspired, but because I was surviving. I wrote about girls who grew wings, about unwanted daughters who became empresses, about shadows that became stars. Writing became my rebellion, my sacred place. In my stories, I mattered. One day, my English teacher, Ms. Bryant, asked me to stay after class. She held one of my stories in her hand, about a girl whose family forgot her birthday every year until she left and became a best-selling author. She didn't say anything at first, just smiled. Then, softly, she said, "You have something rare, Rachel. Something powerful. Don't let anyone make you forget it." That sentence changed me, because it was the first time someone said I was more than the background noise. But real life doesn't pause for gentle encouragements. When I turned 16, Paige graduated and left for college on a scholarship. She didn't say goodbye. Caleb started driving and rarely came home. And my mother, well, she finally told me the truth. It was a Friday night. I had gotten an A+ on my literature final and left the paper on the counter, hoping she'd see it. Instead, she slammed the dishwasher and said, "I hope you don't think this means anything. Intelligence doesn't fix everything. You were a mistake, Rachel. A drain." She said it like she was talking about a leaky pipe, like I was an inconvenience that had outlived its usefulness. I don't remember my response. I think I just stood there, frozen. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't run away, not yet. But I needed to know I could. The betrayal wasn't one moment. It was a slow unraveling. 1,000 tiny cuts over years. A kind of emotional erosion. And even though I didn't fully understand what it meant to be unwanted at the time, I felt the weight of it. I lived it. But here's what they didn't know. In their absence of love, I built my own identity. In their neglect, I found strength. And in their betrayal, I found the fire to become someone they couldn't ignore. After graduating high school, barely acknowledged by my family, I applied to a small creative writing program at a community college. Ms. Bryant helped me with the application. I didn't even tell my family I applied. I just left the acceptance letter on the kitchen table one morning. No one said congratulations. But I took that silence and turned it into fuel. College wasn't easy. I worked 2 jobs, a bookstore and a diner, to pay tuition and rent. I lived in a 1-room apartment above a garage. Sometimes I ate ramen for dinner. Sometimes I didn't eat at all. But I wrote.
Every
Single
day.
I started submitting short stories to small magazines. Got rejected dozens of times. Until one day I didn't. A small online journal accepted my story titled, The Uninvited Guest. It was about a girl who kept crashing family dinners she was never invited to until she stopped showing up and the family realized she had been the only thing holding them together. It got shared, then reshared, then noticed by a literary agent. And just like that, the girl who was never enough, never wanted, never seen had become something else. Not overnight, but over time. Over heartbreak, over every whispered insult, and every door closed in her face. This was just the beginning of the transformation. But before I share the moment the world began to notice me, you need to see the cracks that led to the quake. The girl who was discarded was about to become unforgettable. They say your past never truly leaves you. It just hides until you're strong enough to face it. That moment came for me 5 years after college, when I received an email with a subject line, "Feature request." The woman behind, the uninvited guest. I had already published 2 books by then. One had won a regional literary award. The other had made it to the New York Times ebook bestseller list. I had built a name for myself, quietly, steadily, and though I was still battling imposter syndrome every time I sat in front of a blank page, I knew I had stepped into something my younger self never imagined possible. But the message that truly shook me wasn't from a journalist or an agent. It was from Paige. After 10 years of silence, she reached out. Subject: can we talk? No punctuation. No explanation.
Just that.
I stared at the screen for hours. My hands trembled like they used to when Mom would call me into the living room for a discussion. I didn't reply. Not that day. But curiosity is a dangerous drug. And trauma doesn't respect success. The next morning, I got another message, this time longer. She said she'd read my latest book. She said she cried. She said she finally saw me.
Saw me?
Where was this vision when I was 10, crying on the stairs after she locked me out of her room? I still didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new document and started writing again. Not fiction, not a poem, not a blog post, but a letter to myself. Rachel, you are not required to open old wounds to validate your healing. Rachel, you owe no one your pain just because they finally decided to look at it. Rachel, remember who you became without them. But the universe has a strange sense of humor. The very next week, I got an invitation to speak at a local literary panel, hosted in none other than Colorado Springs. My hometown, the place I had sworn never to return. At first, I planned to decline. But something in me whispered, what if you went? Not to be seen, but to be solid. To show the ghosts you've outgrown them. So, I went. I arrived at the event venue, a beautiful brick community center downtown, just blocks from my childhood school. The smell of pine and mountain air filled my lungs, almost cleansing me, almost. The panel was packed. Readers, aspiring authors, local press. I sat alongside 2 other writers, both of whom were far more polished and talkative than me. But when it was my turn to speak, I said something I didn't plan. When you grow up being told you're forgettable, you learn how to become unforgettable. Through your art, through your voice, through your survival. Writing isn't how I found myself. It's how I built myself. The room went silent. Then came the applause. Not just polite claps. Real applause. I almost cried. But the real twist came after, in the lobby during book signings. That's when I saw her. My mother. Standing in the back. Same pinched expression. Same rigid posture. As if she had been frozen in time and thawed just for this moment. Beside her, in a sleek navy coat, stood Paige. Her eyes were glassy. Her lips tight. She held one of my books like it might explode. I froze. Pen in hand. Smile half-formed. I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. Paige approached first. Hi, she said, as if that could fix 10 years of silence. I nodded slowly, unsure if I was hallucinating. The noise around me faded. The crowd blurred. It was just us. I read your book, she said, swallowing. I didn't know. No apology. No admission. Just I didn't know. But she did know. She saw it. She lived in it. She helped cause it. Then came my mother. She didn't say anything. Just stared at me, like she expected me to bridge the years. To carry the weight again. Finally, she said, you've made quite the name for yourself. Guess that stubbornness paid off after all. Stubbornness? That was her takeaway? I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I didn't run. Instead, I smiled, not out of joy, but power. I stood, took my book from the table, and handed it to my mother. This one's about a girl no one believed in, I said. But she kept going anyway.
She didn't respond.
Paige blinked, tears forming. That moment sparked what I can only describe as the rising tension of my adult life. Because after that, the calls began. Paige wanted to meet again. My mother asked if I'd be home for Thanksgiving. Even Caleb, the brother who'd vanished into adulthood, emailed me saying, heard about your success. Pretty cool. Why now? Was it guilt? Nostalgia? Regret? Or were they just drawn to my light now that it no longer depended on them? I agreed to meet Paige one afternoon at a coffee shop. I told myself I was doing it for closure. She looked older.
Softer.
No longer the high school queen. Now just a woman carrying the weight of her own mistakes. We talked about her job, her kids, her divorce. Then, finally, she said, "I know I wasn't kind to you. I was young. And threatened." I raised an eyebrow. Threatened? By me? She nodded. "You were real, Rachel. I was pretending. And I hated that." For the first time, I saw her not as my tormentor, but as someone broken in a different way. But forgiveness isn't instant. It's a slow thaw. It requires truth and time. And I wasn't ready to give her both. Not yet. Around this time, I was offered a book deal from a major publisher for a memoir. They wanted me to write my story. All of it. The betrayal, the neglect, the silence, the slow, burning rise to becoming someone. I hesitated. Writing fiction gave me freedom. Memoir would demand honesty. But something inside me whispered, "If you don't tell it, who will?" So, I said yes. As I started writing, the past came alive again. The smell of my childhood pillow. The weight of my mother's disappointed eyes. The night I wrote my first story under a flashlight while everyone else slept. Every paragraph was a scar I had to reopen. But every chapter was a salve I applied myself. Meanwhile, my family kept reaching out, texting, liking posts, even tagging me in throwback photos. Proud of my sister. Look how far she's come. My daughter, the author. The irony? They wanted to be part of my narrative now that I had made it out of theirs. The true conflict wasn't whether I should forgive them. It was whether I could let them become characters in the story they tried to erase me from. Were they ready for the truth? Because the truth was sharp, unflinching,
And raw.
My editor read the draft and said, "Rachel, this isn't just a book. It's a mirror. And people will either see themselves or hate the reflection." She was right. When the book was announced, the backlash from my family started before the release. Mom texted, "This is how you thank us?" Paige called me in tears. Caleb sent a cold email. "You really want to destroy the family name?" But I wasn't destroying anything. I was just telling the truth. And the truth, like light, makes shadows squirm. That was the tension I lived in. The push and pull of guilt and clarity. Of wanting peace, but choosing truth. Because the Rachel who used to whisper poems into a sock drawer had grown up. And she was done whispering. The week before my memoir's official release, my hands trembled with the weight of everything I had poured into those pages. The book was titled Unwanted, A Daughter's Reclamation. I had chosen that title deliberately, because that was how I had felt for most of my life. Discarded, overlooked, labeled as too sensitive, too strange, too much. But now I was reclaiming that word. No longer a wound. Now a banner. My publisher scheduled a national book tour, LA, Chicago, New York, Atlanta. It was everything I had once dreamed of. But with each city, each reading, each Q&A session, I was reminded that my story didn't just belong to me anymore. It belonged to every reader who cried in the front row. Every daughter who came up afterward saying, "Thank you for saying what I was too scared to admit." Still, the tension at home didn't go away. When the book hit shelves, my mother sent me a scathing voice message. "You've aired our dirty laundry to the world. You've embarrassed your family. You didn't even change our names." She was right, I didn't. Because they weren't just characters. They were causes. Paige, on the other hand, was silent. No anger. No congratulations. Nothing. Just silence. The climax came in the most unexpected way. During a book event in Denver, my final stop, a young woman approached me during the signing. She wore a navy coat. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun. And she looked so familiar. She introduced herself quietly. "Hi, I'm Lucy, Paige's daughter." My heart stilled. She couldn't have been more than 19. "I read your book," she said. "Mom didn't want me to, but I did." She paused, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat.
She wrote this.
For you. But she never sent it. I thought you should have it. She placed the paper on my signing table, nodded once, and walked away. I stared at the folded note for what felt like an hour. Then, alone in my hotel room that night, I finally opened it. It wasn't long, but it said everything. Rachel, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it. But I see now what I didn't see then. You were never the problem. You were the light, and I was scared of how much it showed me about myself. I know this letter may never reach you, but if it does, I hope it tells you what I never had the courage to say face to face. I am sorry. Not just for what I did, but for what I didn't do when you needed me most. You were always more than we gave you credit for. Thank you for proving us all wrong.
Paige.
I cried. Not because I forgave her, but because for the first time, someone from my past acknowledged the truth without trying to rewrite it. And that was enough. Later that night, I stood by the window of my hotel room, staring out at the city lights. I whispered something out loud. Something I never thought I'd say. Maybe I wasn't unwanted. Maybe I was just unseen. That was the real resolution. Not a reunion. Not a fairy tale apology. But clarity. In the months that followed, the book made waves. Book clubs. Podcasts. Awards. People started calling me a voice for the voiceless. An advocate for emotional justice. A truth teller. It felt surreal. But with the praise came the whispers too. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years tried to reach out. Some asked for their side to be included in interviews. Others wanted me to tone it down. But I had found my power, and I wasn't dimming it for anyone. One evening, while giving a TEDx talk, I looked out at the crowd and said, "The people who once ignored your cries might one day hear your voice echo through a microphone. The people who doubted your worth might one day introduce themselves as your relative. And when they do, don't shrink. Don't apologize. Stand taller, because your voice is the proof that you made it out. Not in spite of them, but because you finally chose you." After the event, a woman in her 60s came up to me. She said, "You wrote the story I never could. But in reading yours, I felt like I healed, too." I hugged her, because that was why I did it. Not for revenge. Not for validation. But for the healing. For the generations behind me who deserved better. Months later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, I received a package. There was no return address. Inside, a small photo album. On the first page, a note. From one memory keeper to another. I hope you find peace in what remains. Signed, Paige. The album contained old photos of us as children. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. Backyard summers. Moments that felt like fiction now. But still, part of the tapestry. I didn't cry this time. Instead, I placed the album on my bookshelf. Not hidden, not prominent. Just there. A part of the story. Not the whole. And that was the final resolution. I had turned my betrayal into a bridge. I had turned their silence into a song. I had turned unwanted into unforgettable. And even if they never said another word, I had said mine.
Loud. Clear.
True. There are moments in every woman's life when she sits quietly in a room, unseen, unheard, and uncertain of her place in the world. And then something within her whispers, "You are more than this." That whisper, that inner voice, is where the true story begins. My story began there too. Not when I published my book. Not when I confronted betrayal. But when I finally sat with my pain and said, "You don't owe me anymore." To every woman who has ever been made to feel like an afterthought. To every daughter who is called too emotional, too dramatic, too much. Let me remind you, you are not too much. You are enough and then some. Your emotions are not weaknesses. They are signals. They are truths that others weren't ready to hear, but that doesn't make them any less valid. I used to wonder what my life would have looked like if I had been loved right the first time. If I had been held instead of pushed away. If Paige had protected me instead of pretending I didn't exist. If my mother had believed in me instead of telling me to be quiet. But then I realized that version of life would not have given me the strength I carry now.
Pain didn't break me.
It built me. Silence didn't erase me. It sharpened my voice. Abandonment didn't define me. It freed me. So, if you're standing in that painful place right now, the place where betrayal echoes louder than love, I want to ask you something. What if this pain isn't the end of your story, but the start of your power? What if, one day, your tears become someone else's permission to heal? What if your voice, trembling as it is, becomes the soundtrack of someone else's breakthrough? I know it's tempting to wait for an apology, to hope that one day they'll come back and say, "I was wrong. You were right. I see you now." But the truth is, they may never come. And that's okay. Because your peace cannot be built on someone else's regret. Your growth does not depend on their remorse. Your healing does not wait for their permission. Forgiveness? That's up to you. Maybe you'll find it. Maybe you won't. Either way, you are allowed to move forward without carrying the weight of what they did. You are allowed to rise, even if no one claps for you. You are allowed to speak, even if they try to silence you again. You are allowed to shine, even if it blinds the people who once left you in the dark. Here's what I know now, years later. The people who tried to bury you will one day tell others they knew you when. They will say, "I always believed in her," while forgetting the days they watched you drown without reaching for your hand. Don't hate them for it. Pity them, because they missed the beauty of your becoming. Let this be your permission to write your truth, to love your younger self, to outgrow the spaces that once suffocated you, and to prove, most of all, that they were wrong about you. If my story has touched a part of you, if it stirred something quiet and aching, then I leave you with this. Stand tall in your truth, even if your voice shakes. Reclaim the parts of you they tried to erase. And when the world tells you you're too much, remind it that you were never meant to be small. Let this moment, right here, right now, be the beginning of your next chapter. The one where you stop surviving and start rising. Because you were never unwanted. You were unstoppable all along.